Not yet.
Yes, yes, we can see.
Okay,
So
some
maybe
people.
it's going slowly. Yeah. Okay.
All right. All right. Okay,
Okay.
we can see.
Okay. Thank you for that introduction. Okay. Well, the origins of the hibernophobia, and this is my today's topic. And to warm up, I want to start with some quotes. So, Australian Minister Marta Nowak in 2005 said that if anybody knocks on your door that has an Irish accent, automatically ask them to leave. 100 years before, the Jewish politician Benjamin Disraeli said that, yes, I am a Jew, and when the Irish ancestors of the right honourable gentleman were brutal savages in an unknown island, mine were priests in the Temple of Solomon. In the 16th century, Edmund Spenser wrote that "Merry those be the most barbaric and loathly conditions of any people, I think, under heaven. They, the Irish, do use all the beastly behaviour that may be. They oppress all men, they spoil as well the subject as the enemy. They steal, they are cruel and bloody, full of revenge, and delightfully in deadly execution, licentious, swearers and blasphemers, common ravishers of women and murderers of children." And digging more in the past, we can find the quite similar extract from Gerald of Wales from the 12th century that said, "They, the Irish, live on beasts only and live like beasts. They have not progressed at all from the habits of pastoral living. This is a filthy people, wallowing on vice. Of all people, it is the least instructed in the rudiments of the faith. They do not yet pay tithes or first fruits on contract marriages. They do not avoid incest." So the above quotations illustrate vividly that hibernophobia, also known as anti-Irish sentiment, is a long-lasting idea. This concept, which stands at the center of my reflection, is a modern term used to describe a collective resentment against the Irish and their culture, the roots of which are usually found in the Middle Ages. Although the resentment against Ireland and its people, evident in historical sources, has been accelerating since the 12th century, largely through the work of Gerald of Wales, much earlier classical texts on which the Welsh monk seemed to have drawn contain the contain the image of Ireland as a savage, uncivilized place uninhabited by barbarians. The ethnic stereotyping factors were in this case the climatic conditions, which, according to ancient thought, indicated explicitly in the case of Ireland by Strabo, Pomponius Mela, or Theodorus Siculus, were to condition the development of culture and state. Fragments of Hellenistic thought that describe Ireland place it in the topoi of barbarian north, a place uninhabitable due to the harsh climate, which had a devastating effect on the custom of the Irish and the development of their culture, which in modern discourse we can juxtapose with the phenomenon of the so-called climatic determinism. In the work of the ancient, therefore, one can find early traces of this modern idea, which holds that physical and climatic conditions dictate the formation of cultural language and custom. And following this idea, the aim of this paper is to look at the early narratives about Ireland in order to examine how the climate-related opinions influence the development of longevity of the negative image of Ireland. The purpose of this presentation will be to analyze the relationship between the perception of climate in foreign lands and the implication of the causal reasoning in the process of depicting foreign cultures in the thought of the ancient authors. These are the questions that I will I hope to answer. So, what was the relationship between climate and the attribution of traits to Irish people that form its basis? How did the process of attribution of traits proceed? Also, what was the process of association given elements of climate with elements of character? On what basis did prediction of the behavior of the Irish people emerge? And finally, in what way might this deterministic view have contributed to the hardening of the negative image of Ireland? My aim, therefore, will be to try to reconstruct this causal projection from ancient texts, which assumed the existence of causal links between being in a certain environment and the acquisition of character traits by the people living. in it. As the above-mentioned research is actually concerned with the formation of a negative stereotype of Ireland and its people, in my paper I will try to combine a linguistic analysis related to the theme of the barbarous North with theories from the field of social psychology. In order to organize the structure of the traits that determine the perception of self and others in the case of Ireland, I will use the conceptual matrix of stereotype content model. The ordering of these characteristics that we find in ancient texts will allow us to refer to the research of Evan West from 2019 who has shown that trait attribution on both could lead to cascading effect upon mental state attributions at various levels in the action prediction hierarchy, from relatively stable background beliefs and desires to highly transient motor intentions and perceptual beliefs. End of quote. The structure of my consideration is as follows. I will first show what traits were attributed to the island and its inhabitants in the work of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Then, I will point out the correlation between climate and cultural behavior that exists in the text. Finally, I will try to show where we can locate these traits in the model of stereotype content and to indicate the probable peripheral mechanisms that were behind the creation of links between the climate and the assessment of Irish people's behavior, which contributed to the development of a negative image of Ireland towards centuries. So, looking at the sources, the earliest sources that provide a picture of Ireland in which may contribute something to our consideration though controversial, comes from the Ora Martima of Rufus Festus Avenus. We can read that in Ora Martima that from here it is a 2-day voyage to Sacred Isle, from, by this name, the ancient called the island. It lies rich in turf among the waves, thickly populated by the Hierni. Nearby lies the island of the Albions. The emerging term, Hierne, will be crucial for the naming of Ireland as it will turn out. This will happen primarily because of the brief mention of Ireland in Julius Caesar Gallic War. Caesar wrote that the second side of Britain faces Hispania and the west in which direction is Ibernia, small about 1/2 as it estimated by then Britain. The separation is equal to that of Britain from Gaul. In the middle of the channel is an island called Mon. As Philip Freeman points out, this is a quote, Caesar's Hibernia became the dominant Latin name from Ireland from the 1st century before Christ to medieval times and beyond. The exact origin of this term is problematic, but it is probably strongly influenced by the common Latin adjective hibernus, hiberna, that means wintry or cold, since the classical world originally viewed Ireland as a cold and wretched island, or at least at the land at the distant north. Even in the nomenclature concerning Ireland, there is an important issue of associating the country as a northern area, associated with the cold and presented on the periphery of the world. This view, however, was not fully developed until Strabon, and in whom we find the clearest evidence for the association between the cold and the north and the behavior of the Irish people. This Greek geographer first formulates the following views on the island. If you were to travel not more than 4,000 stadia north from the center of Britain, you would find a region only marginally habitable. This would be the region of Ierne, so that regions further north, where Tuli lies, are no longer habitable. And as also Philip Freeman points out, Strabo was clearly following the tradition of early geographers in dividing the spherical world into Arctic, temperate and torrid zones, in which only the temperate zones in both the northern and southern hemispheres were thought to be habitable. He placed Ireland at the uppermost border of the north temperature zone, beyond which the climate was too cold for human habitation. Strabo also not only reinforces the view that Ireland lies at the edge of the inhabited world, which clearly values this strongly, but it is this Greek geographer who, in the later parts of his work, utters a sentence that helps us to illustrate clearly how in the 1st century before Christ, a causal link was perceived between the cold and the place of residence and the development of civilization. we can read that, but I think that the limit of the inhabitable world is much farther south than this. For modern researchers have nothing to say on lands beyond Yerne, which lies near Britain to its north, where completely wild people live a wretched existence on account of the cold. This place, I believe, is the limit of the habitable world. But the distance one should set down from Britain to Yerne is no longer, nor if there are habitable regions beyond, nor is it necessary to consider the problem if you were believe the above arguments. Strabo's final statement on Ireland is in many ways the most interesting, as it deals not so much with geography as with the supposed character of the Irish natives. So I'm going to, sorry, just previous still. There are also, I'm going just to read it. There are also another small island around Britain, but one of great extent, Yerna, lying parallel to it towards the north, long or rather wide, concerning which we have nothing certain to relate, further than, and this is the most important part of Strabo's work, that its inhabitants are more savage than Britons, feeding on human flesh and enormous eaters, and deeming it condemnable to devour their deceased fathers, as well as openly to have commerce not only with other women, but also with their own mothers and sisters. Strabo attributes to the people of Ireland therefore the worst crimes, cannibalism and incest which place Ireland and its inhabitants almost within the borders of anti-culture, a space in which civilization not so much ends as it is reversed. As a peripheral nation situated in the north with a cold and unfriendly climate, it is unable to build a civilization. And in similar tone, the Sicilian, the Diodorus Siculus speaks about Ireland. He wrote that the most savage tribes are those in the north and those living near Scythia. Some say they eat human flesh, just like the Bretonoi inhabiting the land called Iris. However, a slightly different light is shed on Ireland by the Latin geographer Pomponius Mela. Pomponius Mela, born near the Gibraltar in southern Spain, wrote in his first surviving Latin geographical work, the Chorographia, of roughly the same time that the Romans under Claudius were invading and occupying southern Britain. He wrote that beyond Britain is Juverna, almost the same in area but oblong with coast and equal length on both sides. The climate is unfavorable for the ripening of grain, but yet it is so fertile for
Mikrofon wyciszony. Marta, could you please turn on your phone because we can't hear you?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm very sorry. I don't know what happened. From which part you haven't heard me? Okay.
Go on.
So from the Pomponius Mela, maybe, okay, because so different idea on different light is shed on Ireland by the Latin geographer Pomponius Mela. Okay, but I see that you cannot. Can you see my my screen or not?
Now we can see your presentation.
Now we can see.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay, so however, a slightly different light is shed on Ireland by the Latin geographer Pomponius Mela. Pomponius Mela, born near Gibraltar in southern Spain, wrote the first surviving Latin geographical work, the Chorographia. At roughly the same time, the Romans under Claudius were invading and occupying southern Britain. He wrote that the climate is unfavorable for the ripening of the grain, but yet it is so fertile for grass, not only abundant but sweet, that livestock eat their fill in a small part of the day. But he also claims that the inhabitants of the island are unrefined, ignorant of all the virtues more than any other people, and totally lacking all sense of duty. Pomponius Mela shows different characteristics from Strabon's. First of all, he no longer places Ireland on the periphery of the world. He does not emphasize its ties with the north, but makes a move which is no less likely to depreciate its inhabitants. He first points out to the abundance of land and then to the fact that it is probably lies idle, since its inhabitants lack virtues and any sense of duty. The author, curiously enough, emphasizes the advantages of the land itself. It is fertile land, which coincides with the testimony of Rufus Avenius that it was a land rich in turf. He places Ireland and its people in the group of people who, despite their natural wealth, are not able to maintain themselves. This theme of lack of responsibility for one's own country is also manifested in its military weakness, as Tacitus wrote in Agricola. Tacitus wrote that as for soil, climate, and the character and lifestyle of its people, it differs little from Britain. The approaches and harbours are better known due to trade and merchants. Agricola had taken one of the tribal kings driven out by the internal discord and was keeping him under the pretense of friendship for the right opportunity. I often heard him say that Hibernia could be conquered and occupied by one legion and a moderate number of auxiliaries. As can be seen in ancient thought, two camps of perception of Ireland and its people were formed. Although there is no room for flattering opinions about the inhabitants of the Green Island, there are significant differences between Strabo and Pomponius' moral attitudes towards Ireland, especially related to their perception of the Irish climate. Strabo and Theodore de Cicilus link the lack of civilization clearly with the problem of the harsh climate, which from the perspective must have seemed harsh indeed. In the text of the above-mentioned authors, there is a resonance of the concept which is the most evident also in the writing of other ancient, such as Pliny the Elder or Aristotle. So Pliny the Elder wrote that in the middle of the earth there is a salutary mixture of the two, hot and cold regions. The manners of people are gentle and intellect clear and genius, fertile and capable of comprehending every part of nature. They have formed empires which have never been done by the remote nations, yet those latter have never been subjected by the former, being severed from them and remaining solitary from the effect produced on them by their savage nature. And Aristotle, in Politics, says that people living in colder places and Europe are filled with courage and ambition, but their skills and mental abilities are limited. This is why, although capable of maintaining their independency, they cannot form a political unity or govern the others. The Asians, on the other hand, have both brains and skills, but they lack courage and will. Thus, they are doomed to slavery. The Hellenes, being geographically in the middle, had their share from both of them. Thus, they own the best political institutions and are able to maintain their independence. So, in the words of Pliny and Aristotle, the environmental determinism of the ancient is revealed with all its force. Both Aristotle and Pliny saw a clear connection between the environment in which lived and the behavior of people, the same we observe in Strabo and Theodorus' writings. It is a little more difficult to find traces of casual relationship between Pomponius' Mela attitudes to Ireland and his perception of the climate. It seems that in the case of his description, the culprits were themselves, but here too, there is a combination of a world with a difficult climate, but a fertile world with a trait of laziness and irresponsibility, which is also evident in contemporary stereotypes. In the text quoted above, which points to environmental determinism, there is a very clear error of correlation, called in the social studies the illusory correlation, consisting in looking for causal relations where they do not apply. Attributing character traits on the basis of climate was naturally wrong, but having left valuing aside, it is worth considering what mechanism enabled the creation of that kind of causal relationship that are inherently linked to stereotype theory. And Ivan Westra points out the general definition of stereotype as cognitively efficient mental representation that store information about social categories, which people draw on when making inferences about behavior. What stereotypes do is assign set of these traits' essence to particular social groups for the purposes of predicting the actions of their individual members. According to the stereotype content model, supported by empirical research, people usually base their prediction on two criteria: judgment, competence, and warmth. As Amy Cuddy and Susan Fiske suggest, this is a quote, judgment of warmth and competence underlie perception of others driving perceivers, emotional behavioral reactions, all resulting from social structure relationship. So the warmth dimension comprises such traits as morality, trustworthiness, sincerity, kindness, and friendliness, and therefore assesses the other's perceived intent in the social context. When the competence dimension traits as efficacy, skill, creativity, confidence, and intelligence relates to perceived capability to enact intent. End of quote. Using the above classification, let us look at the graph which show the relationship and consider where we might place the Irish. Let us first summarize what traits were attributed to Irish. So there is a savagery manifested in the practices of cannibalism, incest, and sexual excesses, inability to organize themselves to defend their country, inability to cultivate fertile land, and military weakness. So traits such as cannibalism, incest, or monstrous and barbaric customs tidy up the image of the Irish within the lower warmth. In turn, elements such as inability to cultivate the land, self-defense, or lack of the self-governance define the field of a low competence. Therefore, the image of Ireland in the ancient thought we can easily classify according to this model of the content of the stereotype as low warmth, low competence, and therefore to a subtype of stereotype full of contempt. There is no place here for paternalistic help or envy, and certainly the Irish were not among the admired nations. From the point of view of reflection on the causes of origins of hibernophobia, this attribution has important connotations. To return to the research conducted by Evan Westra, which states that stereotypes inform our mental state attribution and thereby affect our behavioral predictions, it should be stated that it is in fact that prejudice model in our eyes the behavior of others, shaping our prediction about them and thus influencing the formation of casual projections about the nations. Sorry, I have to finish. Perhaps this is where the answer to the long persistent hibernophobia lies. What Strabo or Pomponius Mela wrote finds its way into the later orbit of both medieval and modern opinions about Ireland, because later authors, relying on ancient accounts, took their prejudice and, whenever having had contact with Irish people, adapted what they saw to an existing and well-established stereotypes. And the last slide, conclusions. So I think that the widespread stereotype of the Irishman as a barbarian from a cold country had its roots in the recognition of the cultural relationship between climate and formation of civilization. In antiquity, the oikos of community determined its condition. The climate was a factor influencing the attribution of traits. Thus, it was the causal element, and implies a causal sequence for the evaluation of the behavior of a given group. And also, the climate became indirectly a favor by following the cultural development of a community. Climatic determinism was therefore one of the key factors of the emergence of an aversion to Ireland, which in many respects persists to this day. Thank you very much. Sorry for crossing the time. Thank you.
Okay, you perfectly stick to the time.